Every skyscraper has blueprints.
Mm-hmm.
Every blockbuster, well, it has a director.
Mm-hmm.
And every successful tech innovation, the apps on your phone, the networks powering your campus, it has something just as vital.
IT project management.
Exactly. IT project management. Without it, even the world's most ambitious ideas, they can collapse before they even launch.
Yeah, they often just dissolve, don't they, into this murky mix of missed deadlines, cost overruns.
And features nobody actually asked for in the first place.
That's a truth pretty universally acknowledged in the tech world, I think. The digital landscape, it doesn't succeed by accident.
Yeah.
It succeeds through really defined systematic execution. And that planning discipline, it starts right there with defining the boundaries of success.
Right. And learning how to plan and lead and actually deliver those vital projects starts here in this crucial phase of project scope management. So today, we're diving deep into those foundations of control. This is really designed for, advanced learners. Maybe those of you tackling foundational courses like, say, BCIS 5351, exploring the genesis of project management and why it's so critical for improving IT project success.
Yeah, our mission today is absolutely foundational. We really need to grasp the core concepts, the techniques. Specifically, how do you define the what? How do you set up the necessary boundaries for the work?
And the tricky part.
And maybe the most challenging part, yeah.
Guarding that boundary fiercely against, changing expectations, the inevitable internal pressures that always seem to pop up.
That's definitely our focus. So look, if you're using this deep dive to boost your classroom learning, or maybe you're just really curious about how ideas become, tangible successes, please make sure you like, follow, share, and always check the episode description.
Definitely put links in there. We do. We link directly to extra resources that map this critical classroom stuff to, future career success.
Okay, let's get into it. This crucial foundation, project scope management. So we start at, ground zero, defining scope. For someone new to this, it might just sound like, describing the project.
Right.
But we know it's much more precise than that. What are we really defining when we talk about scope, especially for an IT project?
You're defining, pretty much everything. Scope refers to all the work involved in creating the final products of the project.
Okay.
And this is key. It also includes all the processes, all the deliverables used to actually manage the project itself.
Ah, okay, so it's two-sided.
It's a dual definition, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's crucial because poor scope management, it's consistently cited as a primary cause of project failure across all industries, really.
And why is that? Why is it such a consistent failure point? Is it just like people adding stuff randomly? It's often deeper than just adding things. When the scope is poorly defined initially, different teams, different people, they develop different understandings, sometimes, completely conflicting understandings of what's actually included. Imagine a team building an internal data visualization tool. Maybe marketing assumes, obviously it'll integrate with our cloud CRM.
Sure, makes sense to them.
But the IT team assumed, no, that's phase 2. We're only focusing on internal reporting this year.
Okay.
If those conflicting assumptions aren't caught right up front, in the scope documents,
you got a problem.
You've got massive rework later, budget failures, stakeholder disappointment. It all stems from that initial fuzziness.
That distinction you made, the product versus the process, that leads us right to this idea of the dual nature of scope, which seems so vital, especially in IT, where the process itself can be really complex.
Precisely, and that's why we separate it. We talk about product scope and project scope.
Okay, let's start with product scope. That sounds like the end result, right? The thing the user actually touches or sees.
Correct. Product scope defines the high-level features, the specific functions that the final IT solution must support. So let's take that example of building an e-commerce banking app.
Okay.
The product scope covers those functional bits. The system must let a customer see their last 100 transactions, or it needs to enable peer-to-peer fund transfers.
Or maybe show the latest stock ticker in real time.
Exactly. It's the tangible output, the thing that provides the actual value to the end user.
And then you've got project scope. This sounds more internal, more about how you get there.
That's the management layer, yeah. Project scope refers to the deliverables and the activities that support the IT project methodology itself.
So like the documents and plans.
Crucial items, exactly. Things needed to move the project through its life cycle. The initial business case that justified spending the money.
Right.
The formal project charter that authorizes the work. Detailed design documents, the test plan documentation.
User training manuals.
User training manuals, the final project closure presentation, all those things. They're the tools the project manager uses to basically guarantee success or at least manage the path towards it.
Okay, so if product scope defines what the system does for the user, project scope defines how the project manager makes sure the team successfully builds and delivers that system. On time, hopefully?
Hopefully. But what happens when these two scopes compete? Because they often do.
Good question. Where's the conflict?
Well, a classic conflict is around technical debt. Product scope might say, we need feature X, like yesterday, requires a quick patch. But project scope dictates, hold on, we must follow the security review process. We need formal documentation.
Right, the process rules.
So if the project manager decides to cut corners on the project scope deliverables, maybe skimp on testing or documentation just to rush out that product scope feature.
That creates risk down the line.
It's huge systemic risk, yeah. So balancing those two is absolutely critical.
And to manage this systematically, we lean on the framework from the project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK. This is core knowledge, right? That's KO1 for our listeners understanding how to define and control the project environment.
Absolutely. The 5 scope management processes in PMBOK, they ensure we establish controls right from the get-go. And absolutely central to all these processes is the measurable organizational value, or MOV.
Okay, MOV. We hear that term constantly. It's like the North Star for any project, right?
Yeah.
But can we pause and just define what makes an MOV measurable? Because that seems key.
It is key. An MOV is the ultimate strategic objective. It's what the organization hopes to gain from doing the project in the first place. But to be measurable, it can't just be vague, like improve customer service.
Right, too fuzzy.
A strong MOV has to clearly link to business goals, it must be quantifiable, and ideally it has a time frame. For instance, increase online customer engagement by 15% within the first 6 months after launch.
Okay, specific.
Thereby reducing call center operational costs by $500,000 annually. See, quantifiable benefit, time frame, linked to business goals.
That makes the stakes crystal clear. If the MOV isn't measurable, how can you ever really prove the project was a success?
You really can't. And frankly, if a project doesn't have a clear, measurable MOV, it probably shouldn't even be initiated.
Wow, okay.
The MOV is the absolute baseline for every single subsequent scope decision. Now, let's quickly map how that MOV guides those 5 PMBOK processes.
Okay, first up, scope initiation.
Right. This is the formal kickoff. It's the official green light from the project sponsor to actually commit organizational resources, time, money, people to developing the scope management plan. It moves the project from just a good idea to an active pursuit.
Okay, makes sense. Second, scope planning.
This is like the architectural phase. You're setting the boundary here, documenting, determining precisely what is included in the work, and just as importantly, what is not included. The output here often includes the formal scope statement.
Got it. Third, scope definition.
So planning sets the boundary. Definition gets into the details within that boundary. It means identifying the specific deliverables, both for the product and for the project management process itself, that directly support achieving that MOV we just talked about. It takes the broad plan and makes it really tactical.
Right, actionable. Okay, fourth, the checkpoint, scope verification.
This is a critical gate. Verification is the formal process where you get acceptance. The stakeholders formally agree that the scope, as defined, is accurate, it's complete, and they sign off on it.
Like a sign-off stage.
Exactly. No verification, ideally no payment, no moving to the next major phase. It's about managing risk by confirming everyone's on the same page before major execution begins.
And finally, number 5, scope change control.
This is your defense system. It ensures you have robust, formal procedures in place to manage any changes that people ask for after that scope baseline has been agreed upon and verified. It protects the integrity of the original plan.
Okay, that concept of planning, figuring out what's in and what's out, brings us right back to the scope boundary. You call it setting the boundary. I like thinking of it as building a fence. Why do project leaders need to be almost obsessive about drawing that line right at the start?
Because that fence, as you call it, serves 2 really critical functions. First, it focuses resources only on work that actually supports the MOV. Keep the team focused.
Right.
But second, and maybe even more importantly, it proactively manages stakeholder expectations. If you fail to clearly define what is not part of the project, those explicit exclusions, stakeholders will often just assume it is included.
And that leads to trouble.
Inevitable conflict, rework, frustration. Yeah.
So let's look at the document that actually builds this fence. The scope statement, using our banking e-commerce app example again, we'd need really clear inclusions and exclusions, right?
Absolutely. So the in-scope items would clearly state things like development of the core e-commerce transaction platform, integration with the legacy ERP system, whatever those core pieces are.
Right.
But the exclusions, that's often where the real power lies in managing expectations. Let's say the business analyst hears a lot of buzz, a lot of enthusiasm about future features. Maybe a data mining component to predict stock trends, or a dedicated CRM module for personalized service.
Things people get excited about.
Exactly. But if the project's MOV is solely focused on delivering timely, secure transaction capability now,
Then those other things are out.
then the scope statement has to explicitly state, maybe even in bold, customer relationship management, CRM features, and predictive data mining components are excluded from this project scope.
That acts like a shield, doesn't it? If a stakeholder complains 6 months later, hey, where's my CRM integration?
The project manager can point directly back to the signed-off scope statement. It turns what could be a subjective, emotional argument into an objective discussion based on the documented agreement.
Makes sense. Now, moving inside that boundary, inside the fence, the project can't succeed until we know exactly what needs to be built. And this requires rigorous requirements gathering. I was looking at the sources, and the statistics on the cost of failing here are just astonishing.
Oh, the rework statistic is staggering, isn't it? A major consequence of poorly defined requirements, especially in IT, is rework. Having to tear down work you've already done and rebuild it. And that can consume up to 50% of the total project costs.
Half the cost. Wow.
Yeah, think about that from a strategic management perspective, right? That's SO2, SO3 for our listeners. If half your budget evaporates just undoing mistakes,
You're wasting huge amounts of resources.
massive amounts of human capital, severely delaying your time to market. This isn't just a few hours of recoding. This is major budget hemorrhaging. And often it traces back to simply not defining a requirement clearly enough at the start.
Okay, so let's really nail down the definition of a requirement.
Yeah.
You said it has to be a specific condition or capability, and critically, it must be measurable.
Yes, absolutely. If you can't measure it, you can't verify it. And if you can't verify it, frankly, it shouldn't be a requirement. It's just a wish. We often categorize requirements just to make sure we cover all the bases.
Right. So we have the high-level business requirements. Those link back to the MOV, the big picture stuff.
Then you have the product requirements. These detail the specific functional features, the look and feel, the behavior of the system itself. This is often the longest list, the real nitty-gritty.
Then project requirements. These cover stakeholder expectations about how the project itself is managed, right? Like status report formats, communication frequency.
Exactly. How often do they want updates? What format? Who needs to be involved in approvals? And finally, quality requirements. These detail the standards, the specific tests, maybe certifications needed, performance checks, things like 99.9% uptime guarantee, or must comply with IP privacy regulations.
Gathering all of these, the elicitation process you mentioned, that takes significant research skill, right? SO1, it's proactive engagement. We
Right.
talked about interviews and surveys, but the sources really highlighted joint application design workshops, or JAD sessions. What makes a JAD session different from just, a regular group meeting?
JAD sessions are much more structured and intensive. They aren't just casual brainstorming. They typically involve an impartial facilitator, someone who guides the process.
Okay.
They use time boxing for specific activities to keep things moving. And crucially, they bring together a cross-section of all the key players in one room, often for an extended period, maybe a day, maybe several days.
So everyone together.
Everyone, the sponsor, the end users, the business analysts, the technical staff. The goal is rapid, consensus-driven requirement definition. By getting everyone in the room, focusing intensely, JAD minimizes that endless back-and-forth ambiguity that often plagues traditional requirements gathering.
So it leads to faster sign-off.
Faster sign-off, fewer misunderstandings later about what the product requirements actually meant. It can be incredibly effective, though it requires significant upfront commitment from everyone involved.
Okay. But even with great elicitation, sometimes abstract requirements are hard to grasp. We need visualization, right? Especially for defining the system's boundary and scope.
Absolutely. That's where diagrams from systems analysis become indispensable tools. We tend to rely on two main types for defining that high-level product scope. First, the context-level data flow diagram, or DFD.
Context DFD. What insight does that give us?
The context DFD is brilliant for showing this system at, the 10,000-foot view. It represents the entire IT solution as just a single central process typically drawn as one circle.
Just one bubble.
Just one bubble. Its real value is defining the external environment it interacts with. It clearly shows all the directional flows of data, the inputs and outputs between that system, the bubble, and all the external entities it talks to.
Like users. Other systems.
Could be users, could be outside systems like a credit card processor, departments like accounting. It visually locks down the scope boundary by defining every single data input the system must accept and every data output it must produce. Anything not connected isn't in scope at this level.
Okay, very clear boundary definition. And the second key visual tool you mentioned is the use case diagram from UML, the Unified Modeling Language.
Right. The use case diagram shifts the focus a bit. It looks more at the functionality from the user's perspective. It identifies the main functions, the use cases that the system actually performs. These are usually shown as ovals inside a boundary box representing the system.
Okay.
And crucially, also shows the actors, the different users, or maybe other systems that are outside the boundary box interacting with those functions.
So you see who does what.
Exactly. If the boundary box contains a use case like process customer order, but clearly excludes something like managed server infrastructure, then the scope is visually unmistakable. These diagrams are invaluable because they force early agreement on that boundary before you spend time and money writing a single line of code.
All right, so we've got the scope statement, we've gathered requirements, we've visualized the boundary. Now we need to define the actual work involved. And this brings us to the work breakdown structure, the WBS. I really want to spend some time here because, as you hinted earlier, this seems to be the single biggest point of confusion for people new to project management. That's KO3, right? Demonstrating knowledge of terms and techniques.
It absolutely is. And students, professionals too, often struggle because the name itself is a bit misleading. A WBS is, and this is the definition to burn into your brain, a deliverable-oriented grouping of the work involved in a project that defines its total scope.
Okay, say that again. Deliverable-oriented.
Deliverable-oriented. We have to repeat it. It is not about breaking down activities or tasks. It's about breaking down the results, the deliverables. It defines the what, the end products, tangible or intangible of the project.
So if someone masters just one thing from this whole deep dive, maybe it should be the cardinal rules of a good WBS. Let's start with the absolute most critical rule, the one that fights that natural urge to just list tasks.
Rule 1. Outcome-focused use nouns, not verbs. This is the big one. This rule forces the focus to stay on the end product, the outcome, not the tasks you perform to get there.
Okay, nouns, not verbs. Give me an example. Building a bicycle.
Right. If you're building a bicycle, you don't list WBS items like weld the frame or paint the body or stitch the leather seat. Those are activities. Those are verbs.
Right, things you do.
Things you do. Instead, you list the deliverables, the nouns, frame assembly, wheel set, brake system, seat cushion. The verb implies a task you perform. The noun implies a verifiable, tangible thing, a deliverable you can hand over.
Okay, let's try another analogy. Building a new database infrastructure. How would that noun versus verb rule play out?
Okay, if you used verbs, your WBS might list things like write SQL code, test the server connection, install the operating system. That looks like a to-do list, right? An activity list, and that leads to massive confusion when you try to schedule or budget.
Because write SQL code isn't a deliverable.
Exactly. It's an ongoing activity. Using nouns, the WBS lists the deliverables. Database schema document, tested server installation, finalized data migration plan, user acceptance testing report. Each of those is a distinct end item that can be completed, reviewed, and signed off on.
Got it. Okay, that's huge. Rule 2 is the famous 100% rule.
This is about completeness. It's almost mathematical. The rule dictates that the sum of the work, meaning the sum of the deliverables at each child level, must represent 100% of the work defined at the parent level directly above it.
So everything has to roll up.
Everything has to roll up perfectly. The WBS must be exhaustive for the defined scope. If you break down the overall project, say, Level 1 is new house construction.
Okay.
And Level 2 has 4 main components: foundation, structure, systems, like electrical, plumbing, and finishes. Those 4 Level 2 items together must represent 100% of the completed house as defined in the scope. Nothing can be left out, nothing extra can be in there.
Makes sense. And Rule 3 is about avoiding confusion between those items, mutually exclusive.
Right. This means that all the elements, all the deliverables at any particular level of the WBS must be distinct and independent. There should be no overlap in the deliverables themselves or the work content required to produce them.
Why is that so important?
Well, If the foundation deliverable somehow overlaps with the structure deliverable, you could have two different teams trying to procure the same materials, maybe two different budget lines, allocated for essentially the same piece of work. It leads to duplication, confusion, and wasted resources. The WBS forces clean boundaries between deliverables, which promotes clear accountability.
Okay. And finally, there's a rule of thumb about how deep to go, the hierarchy rule.
Yeah, this is about manageability. While really complex projects, building a space shuttle or something might go deeper, the general consensus, the best practice, suggests decomposing the WBS into about 3 to 5 levels for most projects.
Why not more?
If you find yourself going much beyond 5 levels, it's often a red flag. It usually indicates that you've accidentally slipped back into listing activities, verbs, instead of sticking to deliverables, nouns. It gets too granular to manage effectively as deliverables.
Okay. So once we follow these rules and decompose down to the absolute lowest level of the WBS, we arrive at the work package. This sounds like the fundamental unit.
It is. The work package is the most granular deliverable in the WBS. It's the unit from which all your subsequent detailed planning flows, your schedule estimates, your cost estimates, your resource assignments.
So it has to be really well defined.
Absolutely. A work package must meet 4 key criteria. It has to be definable, clear what it is, clear start to end. Estimable, we can reasonably estimate the effort, duration, and cost to produce it. Manageable, someone can be assigned responsibility for it. And, going back to Rule 3, mutually exclusive, no overlap with other work packages.
And to help projects managers, maybe especially students learning this, figure out how granular to get, when to stop breaking things down. There are some practical rules of thumb, heuristics, like the 880 rule.
Yeah, the 880 rule is a pretty handy guideline, especially in more traditional waterfall-type environments. It basically advises that a single work package should generally require no more than 80 hours of effort to complete, and no less than about 8 hours.
So like between 1 day and 2 weeks of work for one person.
Roughly, yeah. If a package looks like it'll take 120 hours, the rule suggests you probably need to break it down further into smaller deliverables. If it's only 4 hours, it's likely too small, too granular, and maybe it should be bundled up with another related small deliverable into a slightly larger work package.
Okay, but wait a second. How does this 880 rule square with modern development, specifically Agile methods? In Agile, we often work in 2-week sprints, which is exactly 80 hours for a full-time person. So could a single work package take up an entire sprint? That doesn't feel very agile, dividing the sprint into just one chunk.
That's an excellent point, a really good critical evaluation. That's KO2, evaluating situations. The 880 rule is a heuristic, right? It's a guideline, not an unbreakable law. In Agile, the focus shifts.
How so?
You might use the second practical rule we often hear: limit the work package duration to fit within a single reporting period. So if your sprints are your reporting periods, say 2 weeks, then yes, work packages should ideally be sized to fit comfortably within that time frame, often much smaller.
So Agile naturally pushes for smaller packages.
Exactly. In Agile, the emphasis is really on breaking down the product backlog items, the features, into pieces small enough that the team feels confident they can fully complete them, design, build, test, within a single sprint. This naturally drives the size of the effective work package well below the 80-hour mark, often just a few days of effort, to ensure a smooth flow of value delivery within the iteration. So the heuristic kind of adapts itself to the methodology's cadence.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, because the WBS elements themselves are necessarily brief, just the noun phrase, like database schema document, we need more detail somewhere.
Yeah.
That's where the WBS dictionary comes in, right?
The dictionary is absolutely crucial. It's the companion document to the WBS visual structure. It translates those brief deliverable names into a comprehensive definitions, scope details, and other vital context for the teams who actually have to execute the work. Without it, the WBS is just a list of labels.
So what kind of information must a good, robust WBS dictionary contain to be actually useful?
Well, for each work package element, it needs to include the unique work package ID, like a code, the name matching the WBS, and then a detailed description. This description is critical. It should clarify exactly what is included in this deliverable, and sometimes, just as importantly, what is not included for this specific piece.
Okay, Ados.
It should also list the assigned team or individual responsible, the estimated due date or duration, the acceptance criteria, how will we know it's done correctly, and the estimated cost or resource allocation needed to produce that specific deliverable.
And this document, the WBS dictionary, becomes strategically vital then. It's not just administrative overhead.
Oh, absolutely not just overhead. It is the foundation for almost everything that follows in detailed planning. The WBS structure, defined and elaborated by the WBS dictionary, is what allows you to then build your detailed project schedule, figure out your resource breakdown structure, the RBS listing all the people, skills, materials, equipment needed, and establish your cost, baseline, and budget.
So if the WBS is flawed,
If the WBS is flawed or the dictionary is incomplete, then every subsequent planning, document, schedule, budget, resource plan is essentially built on quicksand. It's that fundamental.
okay, we've planned the work using the WBS, we've defined all the deliverables down to the work package level, detailed them in the dictionary. Now we're moving towards execution. But before a project manager really lets the team loose, they need that formal buy-in, right? That final check, that scope verification and acceptance.
Exactly. Verification is that final checkpoint before serious execution really ramps up. It's the formal acceptance by the key project stakeholders, usually the sponsor, maybe key users, that the deliverables, as defined in the WBS and dictionary, are complete, they're accurate, and critically, they still support that measurable organizational value, the MOV.
So it's a chance to ask, are we still aligned? Is this still the right thing to build? That's evaluating the situation again, KO2.
Precisely. Is the sponsor truly happy with the detailed plan? Has the business environment shifted? Is the scope, as defined, still relevant to achieving that MOV? It's a crucial sanity check.
And project managers need a formal way to capture this, right? Usually like a checklist or a sign-off form, covering the MOV link, making sure deliverables are tangible, verifiable, quality standards are defined. This is also where milestones come in, isn't it?
Milestones are key components of verification and tracking progress. They are those significant, zero-duration events in the schedule that mark the formal acceptance or completion of a major deliverable or a phase.
Zero duration.
Yeah. They don't represent work effort themselves. They represent a point in time and achievement. For example, final design document signed off, that's a milestone. Reaching that milestone provides the formal authorization needed, perhaps, to start procuring hardware or begin the coding phase based on that design. They're critical control points.
Okay. Now let's talk about the danger that's always lurking just outside that well-defined fence we built. The 3 scope traps. This is where the real-world challenge of managing change comes in. These are the creepy crawlies of project management.
Creepy crawlies. I like that. The first trap, often encountered early in the project lifecycle, is what we call scope grope.
Scope grope.
Yeah. It sounds a bit funny, but it describes the situation where the project team just cannot seem to define the scope clearly at the beginning. They're groping around, struggling to get a firm handle on it. This often happens with projects that are complex, maybe use unfamiliar technology, or where the initial requirements were just really poorly defined. The project is basically struggling to find its footing.
And the remedy for scope grope.
Aggressive upfront work, more stakeholder interviews, maybe facilitating those JAD sessions we talked about, really rigorously applying the MOV concept to force clarity on the objectives. You have to wrestle the scope into definition.
Okay, then there's the second trap, the one everyone talks about, the notorious, ubiquitous villain, scope creep.
Scope creep. This is, as you said, ubiquitous. It's often described as death by 1,000 small paper cuts. It's the tendency for the project scope to just incrementally get bigger and bigger after the initial baseline has been set.
How does it usually happen?
It's usually through adding small, seemingly minor features or functions, the bells and whistles, once the project is already underway. Imagine you're building that simple internal reporting app we discussed.
Okay.
And halfway through development, a user says, ooh, you know what would be really nice? A dark mode option.
Seems harmless enough.
Right, and then someone else says, hey, while you're in there, could we also integrate a little live chat support button? Individually, each request seems small, maybe reasonable,
But they add up.
but collectively, these unmanaged additions soak up time, they consume resources, they derail the schedule, and they blow the budget without any formal reassessment of the impact.
And the statistics you mentioned earlier reinforces something like 80% of project managers report dealing with scope creep regularly. It's a leading cause of missed deadlines and cost overruns.
It absolutely is. It's like a silent killer because it often stems from good intentions, right? Users get enthusiastic, the development team gets excited about adding a cool new tech feature, but without a formal process, it just subtly shifts the goalposts, expands the work, without any corresponding adjustment to the budget or the schedule baseline. Very dangerous.
Okay. And finally, the third trap, the most severe breach. Scope leap.
Scope leap isn't about small increments like creep. This is a fundamental, significant change in the project scope. Often, it's a change so large that it alters the project's original MOV entirely.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's say you were originally contracted just to upgrade a hospital's legacy patient record database system, a straightforward upgrade project.
Right.
A scope leap would be if, halfway through that upgrade, a major decision is made to completely change the goal. Now, the project is supposed to implement a full-blown artificial intelligence diagnostic tool that needs to integrate across 3 separate hospital systems.
Oh, that's a totally different project.
Totally different. It requires entirely new skill sets, different technologies, probably massive new capital investment. It's a leap to a different scope altogether. If a true scope leap like this becomes necessary due to shifting strategy.
What's the best practice?
The best practice is usually to formally stop the current project, declare victory or defeat on the originally defined scope, close it out, and then restart the formal project initiation phase for the new, much larger, fundamentally different effort. Don't try to morph the existing project into something it was never designed to be.
Okay, so these traps, grope, creep, leap, they exist. How do we actually protect the project and, frankly, the project manager from the constant pressure, the politics, to just say yes to every single change request that comes along? We need a proactive system for managing scope change, right? That's SO2, SO3 management skills, teamwork.
A formal procedure is paramount, absolutely essential, and it's not enough just to have it. It has to be clearly communicated to all stakeholders up front. This is how we will handle change requests.
Why is that communication so key?
Because it acts as a professional buffer for the project manager. It depersonalizes the decision. It's no longer the PM just saying no. Instead, the request has to go through a structured, objective evaluation process that everyone agreed to at the start.
Okay, let's break down the components of a good formal change process. First, the documentation needs to be rigorous, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The process typically starts with requiring anyone requesting a change to fill out a mandatory scope change request form. And this form can't be flimsy. It needs to be comprehensive.
Boy, if you'd be on it.
It needs a clear description of the requested change, obviously. But crucially, it needs a strong justification. Why is this change needed now? This helps separate the genuine must-haves that support the business goals from the stakeholders' would-likes or nice-to-haves.
Okay, description, justification, what else?
Possible alternatives considered, and perhaps most importantly, it demands an initial impact assessment.
Ah, the impact assessment. This forces the person asking for the change to think about the consequences, right? Put some accountability back on them.
Precisely. It forces them, or someone designated, to quantify the downstream effects. What is the estimated impact of this change on the original scope baseline? How much time will it likely add to the schedule? What new resources, people, money, equipment will be required? And what's the bottom line cost impact?
It really shifts the conversation.
It shifts it from a casual suggestion, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, to a proper business decision based on a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, you want this feature? Here's what it will likely cost in time and money. Is it worth it?
And to keep track of all these requests flying around, we need a system, usually a change request log.
Yep. The log is essential for transparency and management. It tracks every single change request submitted, whether it ends up being approved, rejected, or maybe deferred. It should record its priority, maybe low, medium, high, who has the authority to actually approve or deny this request, and the expected date by which a decision or response is needed.
So everyone can see the status.
Exactly. The log ensures transparency. It prevents requests from getting lost, and it helps manage stakeholder expectations about when they'll get an answer. It also helps prevent political maneuvering by making the status and rationale for decisions visible.
Okay, so a request comes in, it's documented, the impact is assessed, it's logged. Now, when it comes time to actually review that request, what's the ultimate yardstick? The non-negotiable metric for deciding whether to approve it or not?
We have to circle right back to the foundation, the project's MOV, the measurable organizational value. After all the assessment, a scope change should only be approved if it is clearly determined that making this change will move the project significantly closer to achieving its originally agreed upon MOV.
Only if it helps achieve the main goal.
Yes. If the change doesn't directly support or enhance the MOV, then by definition, it's extraneous work. It might be a good idea for a future project, but for this project, it should be rejected or at least deferred. The MOV acts as the ultimate filter.
This sounds like it needs a dedicated group to make these judgment calls, especially on bigger changes. That's the Change Control Board, or CCB.
Exactly. The CCB is often the final arbiter, especially for significant changes. It's typically a formal group composed of key stakeholders. You'd usually see the project manager on it. The project sponsor is critical.
Technical experts.
Yeah.
Business analysts.
Yes. Technical leads, senior business analysts, maybe key user representatives. People who have the authority and the perspective to make informed decisions. They act as objective gatekeepers.
And their job is?
Their function is to systematically review the change requests, scrutinize the impact assessments, evaluate the justification against the project's MOV, and then make a formal decision. Approve, reject, or maybe defer the proposed change. Their primary responsibility is to protect the integrity of the project's baseline, the approved scope, schedule, and budget.
Okay. But we know that the way change is handled can look really different depending on the project's overall methodology. How does this formal CCB structure adapt, say, between a traditional waterfall project and a more modern agile approach?
That's a great question because the philosophy is quite different. In a traditional waterfall environment, the ideal is to lock down the scope as much as possible upfront. So that formal change management process with the detailed forms and the CCB review is absolutely essential. It's designed to guard that freeze-in baseline fiercely. Change is generally viewed as a deviation, an exception to the plan, and it often requires significant administrative overhead to process.
Okay, very controlled. Now, contrast that with agile or adaptive environments. The whole point of agile is to welcome change, right? The structure is built to accommodate shifting priorities.
Exactly. In Agile, change isn't seen as an exception to be controlled. It's expected and managed differently. It's primarily managed through the product backlog,
Which is constantly being reprioritized.
continuously reprioritized by the product owner, who represents the business interests. When new requirements or changes emerge, they get added to the product backlog. The product owner then prioritizes them relative to all the other items in the backlog.
So they might get done, or they might not.
Precisely. They'll get addressed in a future iteration or sprint if they rise high enough in priority based on business value. The beauty of this approach is that if a new feature is requested, but the product owner decides the project has already delivered sufficient value with the current scope, or if the budget or timeline is running out,
Then the lower priority items just stay in the backlog.
they just get continuously deferred. They might never get built. So change is managed not so much by a CCB formally rejecting a request, but more organically by the business constantly prioritizing the most valuable work within the available capacity. It effectively manages scope by focusing on delivering the highest value items, without the heavy formality of constant baseline adjustments you see in Waterfall. Hashtag tag outro Van.
Wow, okay. We have definitely executed a substantial deep dive today into this absolutely critical discipline, project scope management. We covered those 5 core PMBOK processes, really emphasizing that need to link every single action back to the project's MOV, the measurable organizational value.
And we spent a good chunk of time zeroing in on the costly mistake of rework and how we avoid it by being incredibly rigorous in defining requirements right at the start.
And critically, we really focused on the foundational nature of the work breakdown structure, the WBS. We hammered on those cardinal rules, urging you, our listeners, to remember that non-negotiable focus on nouns, not verbs, making sure every single element is a verifiable deliverable.
Yeah, that nouns not verbs thing is probably the biggest single takeaway for practical application. We also detailed the 100% rule, mutual exclusivity. Getting that WBS right is just paramount.
And we wrapped up by looking at the controls, the defenses needed to protect that carefully defined scope. Understanding those unique threats, scope grope, the insidious scope creep, and the dramatic scope leap.
And implementing those rigorous change control mechanisms, whether it's a formal CCB in Waterfall or backlog prioritization in Agile, always making sure any scope adjustment fundamentally aligns with the project's ultimate strategic value, the MOV.
Mastering these concepts, really internalizing them, that's what prepares you, our graduate students, our advanced learners listening in, to become the kind of professional who can consistently deliver. Deliver on time. Deliver on budget.
And turn those abstract organizational needs or cool ideas into tangible, impactful solutions that actually provide value. This really is the difference, isn't it, between leading a successful project team and just being lost in the fog of endless, uncontrolled demands.
Absolutely. So as we close out today's deep dive, here's something to think about, a reflective question for you.
Okay.
Because it really underscores why this discipline, IT project management scope control, matters so profoundly to our modern world. If every single IT project suddenly failed tomorrow, what part of your world, your ability to work, to communicate, maybe access vital services like banking or healthcare, what part would come crashing down first?
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That impact, that deep reliance we have on consistent digital delivery, it just highlights why IT project management and scope management within it isn't merely some administrative function. It's a core strategic discipline for any organization today.
Well said. Behind every app launch you see, every online order you place, every digital innovation that changes how we live and work, there is IT project management making it possible. Hopefully, with well-defined scope.
Hopefully.
Until next time, keep exploring this fascinating world where ideas become projects and where those projects truly shape our future.